Hi, hello, good morning, everybody. I'm Sophie Wu, and on behalf of Garb Slow Fashion, I welcome you to Fashion Revolution Bali. Fashion Revolution Bali is organized in the Fashion Revolution Week, which is held annually to commemorate the Rana Plaza tragedy from 2013. It is a time of fashion debates, sustainability discussions, and panel events, promoting responsible fashion and educating the public. Garb Slow Fashion Valley is a new initiative in Ubud, which promotes the slow fashion movement for the makers as well as for the consumers. We have a physical space across the Zero Waste Valley store in Ubud, but due to the COVID situation, we are launching this week live. Today we'll start with a very special conversation between 4 women here in Bali about ethical fashion. And the event will be moderated by Cecile Schimmer from the Bali Curator, and the participants are 3 incredible women from Closed Loop Fashion, Not a Stitch Up, and KMANA. I'll hand you over to Cecile Schimmer. Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you, Sophie, for the introduction, and also thank you very much for organizing this event. I think you've done an incredible job, especially if we remember that this has been done in a very short timeline, because you had to change all plans from an offline event into an online event, and I think you did great. So thank you very much for that. And I wish you all the best for Garb Slow Fashion in Ubud. I'd love to come visit once everything with the COVID situation is over and we can go out again. For today, for this discussion, I myself, my name is Cecile. I'm from the Bali Curator. I own it together with my husband. We are a sourcing agency in Bali, so we help designers and entrepreneurs with production management and with sourcing manufacturers in Bali. And actually, because of that job, we are faced with questions around sustainable production or fashion, also ethical fashion production on a daily basis. So that's why I'm actually very happy that I've been given the chance to have this conversation with you all, because I think it will be very useful to hear some different viewpoints and hear about all your experiences during this conversation. So to start with, I would like to ask all the panelists to introduce themselves. Maybe Bea, maybe you can start to introduce yourself, tell a bit about KMANA and who you are.
Thank you, Cecile, and thank you, Sophie, for organizing this week, and as you were saying, for transforming it due to the COVID situation into an online event. So my name is Bea Sandra. I'm Spanish. I've been living in Bali with my family for the past 7 years. And myself, I've been working in international development for the past 25 years. So this is my background. I come from an international development background, and I still do that work. So about KMANA. KMANA started 2 years ago, and we are a small family business. We define ourselves, and I'm sure that we will be able to have that discussion, as an ethical, slow fashion and sustainable brand. We produce vegetable tan leather bags, handmade in Bali. And the idea is really to produce timeless bags, like the bags that my grandparents used to have, and that I still have, that pass from generation to generation. So if there are any questions after about myself or the brand, I'll be very happy to answer. I think I'll keep it short so as to give the others the possibility to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bea. Marina, can you also tell something about yourself?
Hello, yeah, welcome everyone this morning. My name is Marina Schabun. I'm German, based in Indonesia as well, and I founded Closed Loop Fashion Consulting about 9 to 10 years ago, and it's a consulting service that is actually working in the field of social environmental compliance on ground, on factory level. So our basic task is actually to assess factories, the status in which the compliance issues are, and then help them take corrective actions to improve the situation related to environmental standards and social standards.
Thank you very much, Marina. Zefa, can you also introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Zefa, I'm Australian. I've been living in Bali for the past few years as well. I've got two businesses. Their babies are still only a couple of years old, but one is my clothing brand that's called Last Layer, and another one is a factory called Not a Stitch Up. The factory was really a byproduct when creating the brand and just wanting to be really hands-on and yeah, really micromanage everything to do with my supply chain after working in the fashion industry for years prior to that. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for your introductions. To start the discussion, the first topic that I had in mind is one that's, yeah, actually an important one at this moment when we are facing the Corona situation, because it's a dilemma, and we call it social distancing versus keep producing. Because what we've been seeing is that not in all industries it's possible to work from home. So if we would apply social distancing, that would mean that some people have to stop working, stop producing, and in many cases that will mean stop getting an income. On the other hand, we have like the health issue, which asks us to keep away from each other, don't come too close. And I would love to hear your views on that. Maybe start with Zefa, since you have a production facility in Bali, Not a Stitch Up. I was wondering, like, how have you responded to this situation with Not a Stitch Up?
Yeah, it's been interesting. That's for sure. It's been a roller coaster. To start with the social distancing aspect of it, for us, we are a small team and we do have a big space. So making sure that everyone has that 1.5 meters in between each other is actually not a problem. But moving forward and trying to predict what's to come, and I guess like with Indonesia as well, we wanted to be prepared for, you know, like a complete lockdown, maybe martial law. Like in an unstable third world country, you don't really know what's going to happen. So we wanted to set up work from home stations for them. Obviously, like in my perspective, health is number one, and keeping them employed and in jobs is also super important. So making that was like really the best solution we could come up with. So everyone does have a work from home station that they can work from and continue to produce orders and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you. So that's great. You've been finding like a solution that takes both sides. So you can still keep the distance while everybody's still at work, right? That's very good. Bea, how is the situation for KMANA and for the artisans you've been working with?
We, as opposed to Zefa, we don't have our own factory, but we work in partnership with a number of cooperatives, workshops, artisans, etc. So we decided to close the shop that we had. We decided to put all the international shipping on hold also because we were also like, is this a time to keep on selling, even though it's a time to keep on, maybe for us it was very important to continue giving work to the artisans, but as you were saying, Zefa, before, like to keep them safe. So how to play that? So as many of them work from home, that didn't pose any problem because they were already working from their homes or their small like workshops where they were working like very close with 1, 2, 3, 4 people. The same applies, for instance, to the women cooperatives we work with in Nusa Penida who make the rang rang. They're also working from their households. So that was possible because of their ways of working. But a couple of places that are bigger, they decided to close, so we had to respect that. For us, indeed, we made an effort to keep on giving like work and to keep producing in a way, even though we are not selling, and we are I mean, that's going to have an impact on us, but this is impacting everyone. But we thought it was important, like for the many of the artisans, they live on this. So many of the others were just like, disappearing because of the situation. So we thought that it was our moral responsibility to do that. And then with some of them, we transform, and like instead of making bags, we started making masks. So I think, Cecile, that you are also doing that with some of the artisans that we're working with. So making like lining, washable, like reusable masks to distribute them to the community. So to keep giving work to them, like to give the income, for those artisans.
Yes, thank you, Bea. I think that indeed is a big problem now, because sometimes closing down is one thing, but then, how do you keep people at work? How do you keep them able to support their households? And I think, Marina, I also saw you posted on Instagram a post about this topic, and you were talking about some countries having all the factories closed, and some others, including Indonesia, decided to keep producing. So what are your personal views about that?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. If we look at Indonesia, I'm working with large-scale factories. So that means they have between 2,000 to 3,000 up to 35,000 employees per factory. So it's really like mass production. And of course, the customer are all known big player brands that we don't need to name here, but just to give a perspective, like how many labor is on site in those factories, and what kind of risk that bears, of course, if so many people are in one place, being so dense together in this kind of time. And for Indonesia, it's quite interesting because first, the Indonesian factories were benefiting from, benefiting is probably not a good word, but the crisis was not hitting them right from the beginning, but brands that are producing in China were starting to shift their production from China to Indonesia in the beginning, because there were 0 cases reported here. So business was still going on as usual while China was in lockdown. And so actually factories here first were overrun with production. And then, of course, the coronavirus started spreading officially with official numbers in Indonesia as well, and the situation started to change. And yes, the government has actually decided that textile factories, if they have a special permission that they can apply for, can continue working, especially since we need so much protection gear these days. So a lot of these factories, since they have lost most of the orders these days, are now switching to sewing the hazsuits and the masks, of course, a lot for medical purposes as well, for export, and also, of course, for the own use here in our country. And well, I do believe it's not necessary to shut down factories, which a lot of countries have done. Indonesia is amongst the collective of 13 countries of the G20 countries that have decided to continue keeping the economy going and keeping supply going that is needed everywhere now, since we already have a shortage in protection gear. So this is quite good, and it's also quite good in the sense of keeping people in labor, as we just heard from Bea, that people really need their job. There is, since especially in developing countries, there are often no good social systems in place that would kind of help them throughout this time when they're lacking income. And yeah, I think what we are doing the last few weeks with the factories that we're working with is to implement like really strong measures on social distancing in factories on the ground. For example, moving workers on shift systems, reducing the numbers of workers that are in the factories on time, regular disinfections, already needing to disinfect when they come into the factory, setting up plexiglass between the stations of them so they're not close to each other, making wearing masks mandatory. So you can implement definitely workplace safety and health measures that would kind of keep them less at risk while still going to work. And I just want to also mention that other countries like Bangladesh that have been fully shut down their factories on government requirements, we face the issues that workers actually denying to go home, because there's so much depending on this income. So they would prefer to go working and being exposed to this kind of health risk than actually being without jobs. So this is also something that we have considered, that this health crisis has become a massive economic crisis. And it is also up on everyone to see how do you balance this and how do you make decisions in this moment. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Marina. That's very interesting insights. I'd like to continue to the next topic, which is about ethical and sustainable production, because we obviously, like in our field, we get a lot of clients sending emails to us asking like, okay, can you help me to source an ethical production facility for my brand, or a sustainable production facility? I want my brand to be sustainable. But then sometimes it's not that clear actually, like what does it mean? Like what does it mean to have an ethical production, or what is a sustainable brand? So I think with Bea yesterday when I called you, we had a little chat also about this topic, and you used words like transparency, integrity to describe this. And also you talked about how the conventional fashion business model is actually in contradiction with sustainable and ethical fashion. Can you explain to everybody who's watching what you meant by that?
First, I think it's like, and I think it can be a very interesting discussion, because I mean, I'm very happy to see that now the discussion is taking place, like with this event and many other events. And when people say sustainable fashion, people start to understand that there's something that is not working properly with the fashion today. There's also a risk of that, the greenwashing, you know, like that many people are using now the word like sustainable, and they are posting pictures or whatever without really knowing what is behind. So without really breaking down sustainability into a number of commitments or into a number of principles that you adhere to and that you try to comply with. And there's also all those words going on. Some people use ethical, some people use sustainable. In the past, it was more like fair trade. Some people are using a slow fashion, you know, so there are all those words that may also create some confusion also. So I think that we are going, because I think like sustainability at the beginning had more to do with environment, and maybe ethical had more to do with human rights or the workers' rights, you know, like, and then there's also the like slow fashion as opposed to fast fashion. I think more and more we're going toward a convergence of those principles, you know, because how can you, in a way, understand sustainability without thinking of the persons and the people? How can you understand ethics or an ethical, you know, like without thinking about the environment? So I think it all has to do with how you integrate practices in your value chain that like won't compromise the future of the future generations in a way, you know. And when we had that little chat yesterday, for me, I mean, it should become the new normal. It doesn't make sense, you know, that you have a piece like a t-shirt or whatever, where there's been suffering or there's been something involved in the making of that piece of garment, where, because I don't remember who said that, but it was like, in fast fashion, someone is paying. Don't, I mean, we shouldn't be fooled, you know, someone is paying throughout the value chain. Someone is not getting paid, maybe there's like child labor, there's something, you know, or they're using chemicals or something, so that in the end, this garment has that cost and can be produced that fast, you know. So for me, should become the new normal. Those, what is not normal is that way of understanding fashion today, you know. And maybe thanks to that extreme, unfortunate situation of the COVID, maybe we're going to start rethinking, you know. And it's not just on the producers. There's a lot to do with the consumers also, like what we want to buy, why we buy, how we buy, and understanding, you know, everything that is behind. So, so yeah, it's about traceability, it's about transparency, it's about integrity. There are many things. And I think as a brand, and I will stop here because, sorry, I have the tendency to speak. I get very passionate about this. So I will try to shut up. I think it's you really need to explain, when you say you are sustainable, you need to explain what is behind, what you commit to, and be transparent about that, and it's like, and also maybe, because it's a whole journey, and maybe say what you can achieve, what you cannot achieve now, but in a way, like be able to explain that, like not just using like the big like label.
Yeah, I think that's a very valuable message, saying, so rather than just saying we are sustainable, we are ethical, it should be more about, okay, so what do we mean by that? Is that right? So instead of just saying we're an ethical brand, just explain what are you doing, and also be transparent about what can you not yet achieve. So maybe there are some points that are not yet traceable, and be transparent about that. I think that's what you're saying, right, Bea? And I think that's really, really important to have said. Going to Zeva, maybe like from your experience in the industry, also working with other brands, building your own brand, do you feel that like these terms, what Bea is saying, like ethical fashion, sustainable fashion, slow fashion, all these things, do you feel they are confusing for people? And also, do you feel that they are ever being misused, maybe?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're always getting emails about, girls wanting to start brands and start them the right way, but like really having no idea how to go about it, asking if this polyester fabric that they've chosen is a sustainable fabric and stuff like that. That's just like, you just realize that everyone has absolutely no idea about what's going on. There is really such blurred lines, and I think that's why education is going to be the number one thing to really change this. Yeah, and in terms of like ethical practices, I think the certificates out there and stuff are all very confusing as well. So when people come to us, there's a lot of people that come to us that we really have to educate along the way. So that's what really Not a Stitch Up is. It's not just a cut and sew factory. We're taking people from start to finish throughout the full production run, from designing to product selecting and everything, through that.
Okay, thank you for that. So yeah, I agree. Education definitely is a key, like in the whole process. Sometimes I'm also saying it's not only about managing the production, but it's also about managing the brands, right? So just to make sure that everybody works together in a good way to actually achieve ethical production. Yeah. All right. So, and then I did hear the word greenwashing when Bea was explaining. So, Marina, I do think you have something to say about that as well. What are your opinions about ethical fashion, sustainable production, greenwashing? Can you explain something about that to us?
Yeah, probably that goes a bit hand in hand because there is like no official definitions for these terms. If we use ethical fashion, or a lot of people I see use fair trade fashion, even so they don't have a fair trade certification, or sustainable fashion, it's not defined. It's not defined by anyone. So of course we can use these terms however we want. And if you look into this kind of term, sustainable fashion, it's of course, it has this kind of general definition of saying that it covers people, planet, profit in the same amount. So that means putting this into practice, there would be someone who is considering our planet and also the people involved in the process in the same way, like making money out of it. And yeah, well, if you look at the big players, of course, there's a lot of greenwashing in terms that they don't have their own factories, and they often don't even know their supply chain after the garment production. So all the steps before that, like the fabric making, the yarn making, the farmers or producers of the raw material, they wouldn't know where it's actually originating from. And how can you be truly sustainable or transparent if you wouldn't even know who has been producing for you? And usually big players, they work with agents in the country. So these agents are placing the orders with garment units, but these garment units can easily also subcontract the orders to other factories. So in this moment already, it's lost the transparency of the supply chain and knowing who has been producing and under which condition has that been done. And most brands actually have a code of conduct or a guideline that policies that factories need to follow. But if you can't ensure that they've been doing this, of course, this is a waste of effort. No, it has no meaning at all. It's just a paper that they have to sign that ensures if there's any anything happening, they can still claim, oh, you know, you have been signing this paper as a garment factory and you have not been following our regulations. So it's up to you to cover the costs now. For example, if there are any toxic chemicals found in the product during a test. But of course, this is kind of just withdrawing from your responsibility as a brand. And while in your marketing and your campaigns and communication towards your consumers, you are saying, oh, we're so sustainable. We ensure we don't have these kind of chemicals. We ensure we have worker safety and social standards in place. But the reality is that they wouldn't know how products are produced for them. So yeah, in this case, like looking in this kind of supply chain non-transparency that is actually in place, greenwashing is of course a big thing, which comes naturally as people are not actually able to communicate sustainability. Yeah.
Yes, super interesting. Also, I noticed that you were talking about different responsibilities. So the brands are giving responsibility to the producer by having them signed some agreements. And Bea, earlier you were also talking about the responsibility of the customers. Zefa also was talking about the education, people knowing. So Bea, yesterday when we chatted, you also briefly mentioned that you were working with your artisan together about to get certification for the leather. So, and I think that's very interesting because that means that you as a brand are collaborating with the artisans, with your production partner, even though you are actually separate companies because you do not own the workshop. Can you explain a little bit about how that collaboration is and also what you feel about those different responsibilities, like who is responsible for what?
Yes, thank you, Cecile. Indeed, I think it's a question of responsibilities, but I mean, as a brand and working with a network of artisans, we feel that our responsibility is to help them achieve that too. So because we could have chosen a policy of like naming and shaming. You can go and say you are not ethical, I don't want to work with you, that's it, you know. But sometimes they are not ethical or they don't have sustainable practices because they've never implemented them, or they haven't known a different way of working, or that has been the normal in that place, the norm. So I think there's a big working in partnership with others as a brand. If you don't have a vertical integration and you have owned the factories, I think our responsibility is to work together with those artisans or with those factories, not just to get a code of conduct, because as you were saying, Marina, like they have it. The problem is enforcement. But even if you enforce it, is to know how to enforce it, you know, in a way. So what can you do? It's not just like, what can you do to integrate more sustainable practices in your way of working? And maybe you cannot get to like, sorry, that's my son. This is like the joy of homeschooling, sorry. So maybe it's not possible to go to level 100, you know, you need to start from where you are and build it progressively. And try to integrate, and I'm sure that Marina, maybe in the work that you do with the factories, that's part of what you do, you know, you are here, you want to get there. What is it? What is the path that you want to build? So for us now, the first was, as we deal with leather, it was to make sure that the leather, we were having vegetable leather 100%, you know. Now we get to that point, it's been a journey, and now we're trying to get the certification also for the artisans we work with in Java, to make sure that that's, if we grow, they can grow with that too. And they're understanding that it's much better to use this leather than to tan the leather using chemicals, you know? So I think it's a collective, for me, one of the key words, and I think it's really working in partnership and in cooperation. And I'm sure that it's not always possible. We are small, they're small, but there's not such a difference in power, there's not a power struggle. Maybe when you deal, as Marina is dealing with a big, like brands, and then with those, even through intermediate like agents, that's much more difficult. And I think the key question would be how to make sure, that they can be assistant in that journey. Yeah.
Thank you, Bea. I think that's very inspiring. I think many brands can learn from that system, like what you've been doing and how you've been collaborating. I think that's really good. Going to Ziva, I think your decision from like having a brand and then after that also starting a garment factory, I'm sure that has something to do also with different responsibilities of different players and maybe wanting to control the process. Can you explain like why you decided to, after having started your brand, also start a garment factory? I mean, you could also have decided to start another brand or something else. Can you explain about that?
Yeah, just to say, I think what Bea is saying was like absolutely beautiful. And I think that's the way of the future. And if brands can start thinking like that, like that's the ideal and that's what we fully need. And I think that was like my sort of method of thinking as well when starting my brand. I had worked in the fashion industry for quite a few years before that. So I had all the questions in my head and I knew what was right and wrong, and I'd been to different countries and I'd seen it all. And when I was searching for factories, I never set out to do my own. That was never something that I wished upon myself. I know production is super difficult and I definitely wasn't planning to do that, but I just kind of wasn't really getting the answers that I wanted or like the control that I wanted. And yeah, it just so happened a friend of mine and I were talking and something had popped up where we knew some ladies that needed work. And yeah, well, like you make clothes, I make clothes. We both want to do it properly, like let's do it. So it was mainly just for me in the beginning, just for my brand, just to see, just to have that little workshop for myself and just to know that my products that I'm putting out in the world were exactly what I wanted and I could really like trust in it. And then it just became apparent that everyone was kind of in need of that as well and they didn't know how to do it. So when we did open up the factory to other people, it just kind of like kept growing and growing. It was like they wanted to do the right thing, so we wanted to like help them into the factory, and then they needed help choosing fabric and this and that. So then it just kind of turned into that. But I think in terms of responsibility, now the clients that we have coming to us, they, because of the business model and because of like not a stitch up as a brand, like what they see, they want to work with us. We have more brands that are like Bea, they think of us as manufacturing partners. We're working on this together to put a product into the world that we're all proud of. And one of the most amazing things that have happened in my life to date was when we did launch this and brands started and launched and they started posting where their clothes were made. And for me, I've never seen that. I've worked in the fashion industry for a long time. It's always this like hidden secret, not necessarily because people think they're doing the wrong thing or think they're supporting a terrible situation, but it's more for the fact that it is hard to find a manufacturing partner. It is really difficult to find someone for ethical reasons, but also quality and trust and turnover times and all that kind of stuff. So people haven't wanted to share that information, I guess, within reason. But yeah, when we did launch Another Stitch Up and started to see that people were really proud to manufacture together and to be posting that, it was huge and something that I'm still super proud of.
Thank you. In the meantime, we're getting a question through the chat, and that's saying it's beautiful how to push your companies to do better, but why do you think it's so difficult for other companies to do the same? Does anyone wants to answer that question? Marina, you want to answer?
I think there is a difference between the size of the company, of course, if we talk about small or medium-sized companies, or if we talk about big players. And then there's also a difference if we talk about someone who's like an entrepreneur or startup or just entering the market, and those who have been on the market for a very long time. For some, it actually means you're implementing sustainability or better practices from the very beginning. This is kind of the core where you're coming from. So this is where you're basing your company on. And for others, it's actually shifting from conventional production to sustainable production. And this journey, of course, is far more difficult. And if we look at big players, they can have up to several thousands of factories working for them. And it takes quite some time to actually implement sustainability measures at all levels, on all stages, with all stakeholders. And as we mentioned before, first of all, you have to collect the data who's actually producing for you, so you can implement the measures. And yeah, what we do at Closed Loop Fashion is, of course, like Bea just mentioned, is to do these assessments, like what is the status of the factories and the corrective actions they have to take to become better. And this can often take several years to do the improvements, depending on if they have to switch on technology, if they need to buy new machinery, that means there's investment involved. If they need new water treatment plants, this is a big expense for a lot of factories. And also to make processes more efficient, to switch to different materials. And also if you look in chemicals, usually they buy chemicals in bulk. So they have a lot of stock of a certain chemical. And if we say you need to replace this chemical, so what is the more sustainable option? Is it, for example, to throw them all away and immediately buy the better chemical, or use them up? So there's always, it's not that easy. Sustainability is also a lot of strategizing on how to get to a certain result. And this can take much longer for some than it can take for others. And actually it should be no problem for no one to do it. It just probably takes more time for some than it takes for others.
Yeah, I think I agree with it. I still remember, Bea, you said to me years ago, you say, you know, it's about doing the best you can, and then you learn, and then you do better again. I always remember that. And I think that's exactly the point that Marina is also making right now. Also, I had another question for Marina, asking about what this Corona situation at the moment shows us about the different responsibilities between producer and a brand and a consumer.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, we are kind of in the beginning of this health crisis, and we can already see massive changes, I think. Since a lot of people have to stay at home, or countries are in total lockdown and retail is closed in a lot of countries, people don't have, at least not have offline access to shopping. And I think while you're staying at home, a lot of people are also considering their shopping habits and the patterns that they used to follow before all this started. Of course, if you're at home, you kind of start reconsidering, what do I actually need? And I do believe that this will change a lot in the consumption patterns in the future, that we might going to consume more responsible and more based on actual needs, and not so much like fun or trend driven. And we can see the first results coming in from the first European countries that started to open up retail again last week and this week, Austria and Germany, where we can see that people are consuming much more careful in these times. A lot of people have lost their jobs. There's insecurity about how long will the situation last, how will we be financially set up. So of course, no one is really like spending money carelessly. And I think the biggest learning that we are having right now is like the whole linear setup of our supply chains, where each supplier is completely depending on his front and back supplier, has been so unhealthy, and the whole power is actually on the brands, and there is a total dependence on the decisions of brands. And as we can see now, the decisions that brands have been taking were totally irresponsible, of canceling already running orders, of not paying orders that have already been produced because their stores are locked, are closed, and they can't sell the products, leaving the factories and the suppliers on all these amounts of money they had already invested in producing and paying their garment workers or workers at all. And this is a dependency that we cannot accept any longer in the future. So the question is definitely, how do we set up our supply chains in a more healthy, more beneficial way in the future, where people are not completely depending on just one stakeholder within the supply chain?
Yes, this is true. So something else that also I've been noticing, like in the requests of our clients, like usually, so it's about ethical and sustainable production. I've also noticed that many of our clients, they request in the labels that they put in their clothing to write "Made in Bali," and that's because they say it's better to put "Made in Bali" than "Made in Indonesia," because they say customers like it better when it says "Made in Bali" than "Made in Indonesia." And that made me think, like, if we have clothing that says "Made in Italy" or "Made in Australia," is that better than when it says "Made in China" or "Made in Bangladesh" or "Made in Indonesia"? I was wondering, Zefa, do you have the same experience? Like, do have people requested that to you as well? And what do you think about it?
Yeah, I have. It's an interesting topic, that one as well, because I think it is important, like for sure, where your clothes are made, that's the most important. So I think like when people are purchasing, if they can know more specifically where it's made, then even better. And I think like after this crisis as well, like when people are wanting to shop locally and support their local economies, that's great. And if they can see a Made in Australia label, if they're shopping in Australia, then I think that's great. But there's also the other side of it, where there are a lot of products that are labeled "Made in Australia," and in some cases, for example, the beauty industry, it could be the product being sent here, the packaging being sent here, and it's literally just bottled in Australia, and they get the "Made in Australia" mark. So it's all really confusing. I wish it was simple, and you could really base your purchases off that, but I think there is still a lot of work to do before that is a trustworthy kind of thing to go off.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Like the same with fashion, probably many clothes are sewn in Bali, for example, but then sometimes they're using fabrics imported from wherever. So it's not that clear sometimes where they are actually made. That's one point. Maybe Bea, do you want to add also to this question about labeling made in somewhere? What do you think about that?
Cecil, sorry, because the connection went off internet. So I have just been reconnected. So I couldn't hear like the question or the answer. I really apologize for this, but it's like the internet that is not working properly. Could you maybe repeat the question?
Sure, that's no problem. So we were talking about labeling, saying "Made in Bali" or "Made in Indonesia," "Made in China," "Made in Australia." Does that actually make a difference? Like, does it say something about how ethical it is, or what does it say to you when you see a label like that?
I think it makes a difference in the sense that there are some countries that you know that they have like policies in place, and that those policies are being enforced, you know, when it comes to social security, when it comes to work standards. So in some places, you know that maybe you have, when you see the label "Made in an X country," you have an idea that in that country, those are things that are like the norm, you know. But having said that, I think that we have to go beyond that label, in the sense that, I mean, because it's not just because the policies are there and because there are enforcement mechanisms that the brand is going to be, you know, like complying with them, or that maybe even in countries where it doesn't exist as such, that the brand and the factory are not complying. What I want to say is that I think there's much more to that. And in this regard, this is what we were discussing yesterday, Cecile, that I think that there are tools today that allow for more transparency. Next week, we're going to have a very interesting conversation is with a startup in London that is developing codes that when you go to a shop and you can like scan the code on the label, you know exactly, you know, like where the materials are coming from, where this has been produced, by whom, etc. You know. So I think this is where we should be going to. It's no longer about the made in, and it's no longer made by me. Yeah, made by me, but under which conditions I've been making this? You know, have it been fairly paid? Do I have a right to protest? Do I have a right to demonstrate? Do I have a right to assemble together with others in a union? You know, it's like I might put like in a difficult or like a dangerous position because of the chemicals. So I think all those things today there are tools that I think allow for more transparency. And my suggestion, my advice would be to go in that direction.
Yeah, I think that would be absolutely amazing if we can have a tool where we can actually know like which part from each garment comes from where. So maybe it's sewn in Bali and the zipper comes from where, and the yarn was made where. And I think that would open up a lot of information, also helps with the education that we've been talking about earlier. Sophie, do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you for letting us know that other companies are actually really trying to help to kind of bridge the gap between actually the knowledge gap between consumers and helping them to actually make better choices. Because I think brands they already have a lot to think about, right? And they have to manage their production, they have to sell. So, and I think what also Bea was saying, and Zepha actually educating your clients and consumers, it is actually very energy draining. So it's very good that other companies are coming in to help, right? I think another company that I've heard from about what is a bit of a similar concept as what Bea was sharing is, of course, every production of our garment has a carbon footprint, right? And you can use also the app, it's similar, to actually check like, okay, how much is my carbon footprint of this garment, and how much is the company that is making this garment, is that actually setting of the carbon footprint? So it connects. Yeah, there are so many things that a piece of clothing, it's about, you know, the knowledge, how it's made, whether the people are working, but also like, you know, how much resource from the planet it takes, and what you can actually do to offset that. I think that was actually really interesting, just to make it connect to all the things possible.
Yes, thank you, Sophie. That's true. Just to give us all like a very short break while we watch a video, I prepared a little video, which is actually a commercial of H&M and their Conscious collection. Maybe you've already seen it before on television or somewhere else. But just to introduce the next topic, I thought it would be interesting that we have a look at that. So I'll try to share the screen and then we can go watch that together. Hold on. Okay, there we go.
Wear brown shoes after 6. Wear a hat indoors. Wear a short skirt after 40. Wear a short skirt if you're a man. Try too hard. Don't try at all. Dress like a girl. Dress like a man. Dress like a teen. Stand up. Mix prints. Mix pink and red. Show your panty line. Go commando. Cover up. Show it all. Be trashy. Be neat. Wear pink, wear blue, wear yellow if you're blonde, wear red if you're a redhead. Wear socks and sandals. Look fake, look chic, look chic. Be a princess, be boring, take a stand, be uniform, be liberated, be old, be new. There are no rules in fashion but one. Recycle your clothes.
Okay, so there was this line, they say, together we can close the loop. And I thought, Marina, that's an interesting question for you. I was wondering, what can you explain to everybody, what do they mean with together we can close the loop, and is it possible?
In terms of H&M, closing the loop means their Take Back initiative. H&M already started this initiative about 5 to 6 years back, so they were one of the first players to actually do this. And they install boxes in their point of sale in the retail shops where you can bring back used garments that you don't want any longer. It doesn't have to be H&M garments, it could be from any sort of brands. And you just bring it back, and they have a cooperation with ICO, a collecting company, that is bringing this into their sorting factories where they sort the garments into categories like vintage or secondhand, and also it goes into recycling. And the major part of this is actually remade into gloves and stuff like this. So it's or insulations. Because of course, most of these garments are fiber blends, and they are made of a lot of different components, so they can't be put into a certain recycling stream as long as they would not be separated, which has been so far nearly impossible. So yeah, H&M is kind of closing the loop. It's not exactly closing a loop, it's more like extending the life cycle of garments by seeing if there are further usage options for these garments that they take back from the customers. And the second they mentioned in the video is Circulose, and Circulose is an absolutely innovative, pioneering startup company that has developed a technology to make a cellulose from used garments, from cotton garments. And yeah, H&M has now launched the first collection using this kind of material. So we have to say, also give the credits not to H&M in this case, to be honest, but to Circulose, who has been putting their own money in effort and time and investments into developing this technology. And yeah, they won the H&M award, and now they are introduced into their collections, which is absolutely great to give them this platform. But closing the loop, of course, should be a holistic concept, and that means you have to make products differently in the first place to actually enable further usage options. And as long as H&M is not focusing on this, for me, it's not a closed loop system. It's a good start to extend life cycles of garments, but it's also not really their own efforts, just taking it back and giving it to a sorting company, and then they have to find further solutions. I think we could all give a bit more effort in making this truly holistically circular.
Okay, thank you for the insights, Marina. Sefa, I was wondering at Not a Stitch Up or with Last Layer, are you working with concept like trying to make it a closed loop process or like circular? Are you looking at like designing garments in a way that they can be used again after the consumer is done with using the initial garments?
Yeah, for Last Layer, definitely. That's definitely what the brand is based on, and we do offer to mend or take back the clothing. For the brands, we don't have much power in how they market that. We, like in terms of zero waste, we don't produce any like fabric waste from we keep all the scraps, we reuse them, they weave them into mats, they take them home. The way we lay our patterns is very, very careful and meticulous, so there is hardly any cutoffs and stuff like that. But yeah, in terms of like bringing back the clothing, it does really need to, at this point, be a brand's initiative rather than ours. But for us, like, I do try and do that.
And Bea, you mentioned that at the moment, your biggest challenge is scaling your brand. So going bigger, and while you scale, still keep your values at the beginning. And also, like Marina just earlier mentioned, that for processes, they take time, especially when we're working with very large companies, right? So can you explain, Bea, why scaling is a challenge for you? Why is it not that easy?
Thank you, Cecile. Yeah, indeed, we're at that stage when, I mean, the model and our operations and production model has been working well for the demand that we had. But as we start to expand and we are having some, we have like, we're selling our bags, for instance, now in Singapore, in a place, or we are questioning whether we can continue with the same model or we need to adapt it. And I think one of the biggest questions, and maybe what Sefa was saying really resonates with what we're living now, because the big question now is like, should we continue working in that partnership model? Is it? I mean, we want to continue that partnership model, but how? With how many workshops can we work efficiently? You know, to be able to meet the demand, or do we need to start considering also integrating part of like the, for sure it won't be like the making of the rangrang or the making of the hardware or like the tanning of the leather for that, but should we start considering having a small factory or something to start like having more control over that? Because what Sifa was saying, I mean, that key question of control is not, we don't have full control. And as we try to respect the way of working of the workshops or the cooperatives we work with, sometimes that has an impact on the timeline, on the delays, you know, whether, so this is where we are now. But for sure, and before that, I would say, there's a very interesting question also for us, is like, how big do we want to be? I mean, is it, and that is, how much do we want to grow? I mean, is it like an exponential, like an everlasting growth? Do we want to become that big? And where is that point where you know that you, for us, what is a no-go zone is when we start compromising the values. That's for sure. So we have developed a sort of manifesto where we have, and in our sustainability journey, as I was saying, it's a journey, because every time we break it down, there's a new question that emerges, you know, and that as, so what is it that we want to keep intact and we know that we have to adhere to, and we don't want to compromise while scaling up that production? And I think the question of how big do we want to be is a big question for us, and I don't have the answer yet. I mean, we are now in that process of like trying to come up with how to do it, what would be the scenarios and the alternatives. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's also very interesting and very good in terms of transparency in talking about, okay, so what questions do you have and what challenges do you face while you're trying to do the right thing, and just admitting that not all the answers are there yet, because it is indeed, I think for many brands, it is a journey to find out how to make things work and how to get everything come together. I think this really relates to a question that we're actually getting from the audience. It's from Randy from Handep. He is working with people in Borneo making handbags, and he is saying, do you think that big clothing brands can really transition to a more responsible supply chain or business practices in general, especially ecological impacts of their operations and production, really hard to offset? How about changing our paradigm to keep business small and focus more on locality? Ziva, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Personally, for me, I guess changing things to small and focusing more on that local production that's where my heart really is. I think like the reason why I wanted to begin last layer as well is because the storytelling behind the piece. I wanted everything that I own or possess to like have that story, to be able to connect with that. And I think that helps with like mindful consumption as well. So definitely that's what I want to say. Like I would love to see a world where like everyone kind of thinks like that. And I think that would change a lot of sustainable issues as well. But in terms of like the big clothing factories, I think Marina might be able to answer that better, because I think she does like what her job is incredible to help businesses like that to do that. So go for it.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting also, Ziva, that I saw that Not the Stitch app has a minimum order quantity of 1 piece. Is that right?
Sorry, what was that?
I saw that Not the Stitch app has a minimum order quantity of 1 piece. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I think that's very interesting, because I think other garment manufacturers, well, in Bali, it's usually still not that big, but it will be at least 12 or 20. So I think that's a really unique concept, to offer brands the chance to just produce only 1 piece of a style. I think that's very interesting. And indeed, what Ziva is saying, I think it's interesting to hear Marina's point of view on this question from Randy.
Hi, Randy. Thanks for joining. Good to have you here. It's actually a very good question. And I think we might have to differentiate. I do believe that you can achieve supply chain sustainability in terms of social and environmental compliance. For big players such as H&M, as you mentioned here, I don't believe they can achieve true sustainability with their current business practices. So I think I would look at these points a bit separately, because of course a fast fashion company that is which is basing their practices on ever faster changing cycles of collections and mass production, and producing low quality materials, low quality sewing and stitching materials and clothes that are actually only made to be used for a few times, that are trend driven. I mean, this kind of practice can never be sustainable, even if their supply chains would be completely cleaned up and everyone would be paid fair and there would be no toxic chemicals involved, no? And it's also based on extracting primary resources only, and it's based on actually wasting all these resources in the end. So in its whole, this system is very limited in the achievements of sustainability, and it would definitely need a systemic change to make that truly sustainable.
Yes, that's interesting. So I think what Marina is saying is that scaling is possible, but that the problem is more in the business model, right? So the business model of fast fashion is based on selling more is more success, whereas the sustainability approach is more about bringing down the number of productions. So that's obviously a contradiction.
And also the question is, of course, if a big player can ever be truly sustainable, like basing their business on needing mass production. So what Andy is asking here also, why versus local or smaller businesses. What is interesting, of course, of smaller businesses, it's a bit like comparing a big cruise ship, big players with a small speedboat, like a small business. So we can see a big ship is very slow and it can only transform very slowly and adapt to new things and changes, while a small boat or small company is very agile and they can be very quickly adapt also now to this current situation we see. Of course, small brands are suffering right now because they don't have the financial background, but we can see how quick they are adapting to this new Corona situation now, because they are small and agile and they can oversee their processes easily. So of course now they are absolutely benefiting from being small, and this is a good and needed question to think in the future, like also how Bea said, how big do we actually have to be? Like, if we split up operations and into a lot of small brands instead of having these global big players.
Okay, and we have another question coming in from Cecilia Vita. She is saying, what questions should the customer ask to ensure the brand does not do greenwashing? So I think that's a very interesting question because, well, during the Fashion Revolution Week, everybody is urged to ask that question, like, who made my clothes? I personally think that's a great start because it is urging brands to be more transparent about who made it, but then maybe who made it is not enough. Maybe we should be asking more things about the process, under what conditions, what materials are used, and usually it's also not one person who made the brand. So if you're saying like, okay, I made your clothes, maybe it's not completely true because there's usually more than one person involved in this whole process. So what other questions could we ask? Does someone want to reply to that question? Some ideas? Bea, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think as you were saying, I think that very first question, like putting a face behind like the clothes, like who made your clothes, is a very good and pertinent question, but it should be a starting point, as you were saying. I think another question, as you were already like highlighting, is under which conditions, how, you know, like how are you working, and what is your environment for working, you know, like in the factory or like with your colleagues, what are your rights? Another very relevant question has to do with the materials that you are using. Where do they come from, or what is the afterlife of those materials, you know? And but of course, those are a lot of questions. And imagine if you go to buy a T-shirt and you have to start making all those questions, you would never end, you know? And those are, so that's why I think initiatives like the one I was mentioning, where maybe there's a tool that can give you those answers, you know, that can help you know, you know, like who's behind, the different people who are behind, whether, because I think in the end, the question is like, can you trust that brand, yes or no? It's a question of trust. Can you really know that what they are saying, they are genuine what they're saying, and that they have integrated those practices? And so if there would be those tools helping you, I think as a consumer, I think that's because otherwise there are too many questions to ask every time you have to buy, I don't know, even a Mac or like a T-shirt or something. That would be like some of my thoughts.
Just to add to that as well, I think it's amazing to ask like those sorts of questions that you were talking about, to know like what happened to the product beforehand, so that you can really resonate with it for the time after that you have it, you know, because you're hoping when you do buy it that it's like for a long future. And I think it's the same as like when you go on a trip and you buy a souvenir. Every time you look at that souvenir, it reminds you of that place. It's like, how can we help consumers really connect with these pieces, like to know the journey of how the material was dyed, to like how the fibers were chosen even before that, to then how it's made. It's like, if we help to make those connections, and then we have these truly special pieces, we just hold on to them a lot longer, and that helps close the loop in return. It's a piece that you want to then pass down to your children, or then, you know, it's those sort of things. I don't think we need all this abundance of clothing in our lives if we like carefully select like that and have that sort of mindset after. So I think that also is part of that, knowing the first life of your garment to then go on to like, the second life of it, sort of living with you, as cheesy as that is.
Can I add, like, I think what you were saying, Sifa, is very important. As brands, we need to tell that story. We need to be the storytellers. We need to tell the story that is behind. And I think this is what I'm realizing, like after 2 years in KMANA, is like, the story of, I mean, you buy a bag that comes with a story, with a beautiful story, because there hasn't been suffering or whatever, and it comes with a story, the materials, who's been making them, so that, as you were saying, there can be a different engagement and relationship with the person who's buying it and who's keeping it. And that we are making things that will last, that come with a story, and that they're made to last. Because if you, I think that's a very important point also, and you were, Marina was referring to that before. I mean, you can make something sustainable, but if the fast fashion paradigm is still on, what is the purpose, you know? If like, maybe we should all consider whether we need to buy 10 t-shirts or we should buy one, you know, buy one that we can really relate to, that we can relate to the brand that is making that t-shirt, and that you can build that sort of relationship. So it's also about building a different relationship with the things that we buy, with the things that we acquire, you know, and that and that is for me, it's a completely a change of paradigm, a change of mindset, you know, in the way we relate to those garments, to those things.
Yeah, I think Bea, yesterday you also said maybe it's not about buying 10 pieces of sustainable dresses, but just buy 2 sustainable dresses. Maybe it's about that as well. Sorry, Sophie, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I love to hear Ziva's point of view and Bea's. So the shift of paradigm, I think, should happen, and from all kinds of levels, right? From the people who are making our clothes, but also us consumers looking at ourselves and trying to make that connection. I personally, as a consumer, because I'm not in fashion, I only actually really started to make the connection when I landed here in Bali and when I saw things more clearly. And I think the other thing was that when I came here, there was more time for me to slow down, to really delve more into how I was consuming and to making those connections. I think what is kind of lacking now, I'm originally from Holland. Actually, if you see what is actually happening in the conventional, in the traditional world, is that there is no time. There is no time to make those connections. People are working and people are consuming. I mean, consuming is actually filling. They are consuming because there's something missing, right? And there's no time, and it's their life is so condensed that looking for connection, it's for real connection is really hard today. They are buying band-aids. They are buying something what is easy to have that instant satisfaction, but really making connections. I think that is really missing. But it's yeah, I think one of the things is really cost time. So actually, I'm really kind of very interested to see what's going to happen after the COVID. Whether I really hope that consumers can also make that change, and that it doesn't always need to come from companies. Because personally, I know KMANA, but there are also a lot of brands who are trying to tell a story, but maybe they're just trying to tell a story. You know, is it a true story or is it just greenwashing? I mean, I find it really hard to distinguish that. Just my consumer's point of view.
Yeah, that's true, of course, because many people are getting better and better in telling stories. I think one of the points like that we addressed earlier about transparency is also maybe what can help is to see how the brand is talking about their issues. Like, are they also being transparent about what is not yet being achieved and what can they still work on? Like, what still, instead of only just showing their great sides, like only showing about what's being done very well, are they also talking about what's not yet accomplished or what is not yet traceable within their supply chain? Because, well, as everybody has said before, I think it is very hard for brands as well. It's not an easy process. Yes.
Yes,
Sophie?
so that's actually really what I love. So if people are asking those questions, answers to these questions do not come automatically, right? I mean, we as a consumer have to really spend time looking for those answers. And I think nowadays with the internet, one of the first things that you, I think, should do is really look at the website. For me, looking at companies' websites, it yeah, I can see if it's just a marketing story or whether there is really somebody passionate, um, um, whether the company is really focusing on getting the right message out. I mean, also telling those a little bit unpleasant stories, right? And the way how they are working towards it. I mean, marketing, I think, generally has always been about just showing their good side. And marketing has never really been about passing on honest information and showing them showing the consumers the wrong side. So I think it's, yeah, that I think is something what a consumer can do. And of course, it would be really interesting if brands started doing that more and more.
If I think another like piece in that puzzle is also the question of certification and certificates that we were referring to. That is like where you have, it's not just that what you were saying, Sophie, that maybe, okay, maybe you can become a very good storyteller, but the story is not true, it's not genuine. And that's also a danger, because this is like many marketing, behind. So how you know if that is true? And this is where I think it's like, maybe some sort of certification is needed. The problem is that there's, as we were saying when we started this conversation, there's not even a definition that is commonly agreed on what sustainability is, or what like slow fashion is, or what ethical fashion means. But there are a number of like certificates out there. What I have to say, and for like small brands like us or small designers, is that sometimes that's a costly process, that is, it's not that easy to get certification. It's like, it's not accessible to everyone. It's like, even some companies and some brands may want to, but maybe they don't have access to that because maybe they don't have the means because they have to pay for that, So, but I think like developing those certificates, or like that, as I was saying, that clients can trust. It's a question of trust, that knowing what they're telling you is true, is genuine. I think that would be also something important for brands, and especially dedicated to maybe like small designers. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Bea is giving a great bridge to another important topic, which would be certification. I think, Marina, yesterday during our chat, you mentioned that certification had failed. I think that's what you said. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, yesterday I said they have failed in this situation, in the corona pandemic situation right now, because what we can see is like violations to human rights right now in a lot of countries. And these kind of certifications that we have in the textile industry that are focusing on social standards and well-being of workers, where are they now? Like, how do they protect the workers right now in this situation? And we can see that there is a true violation. And so I do feel they have failed the people they were supposed to protect. So I don't know how much is it worth the effort to have them when in this moment where they are actually needed the most, they are not here to support people. But yeah, in general, I mean, we have so many different types of certificates for all different stages in the supply chain, for different purposes. And in general, of course, it is good to have certificates because it ensures a certain standard, and which is not only based on trust, but on actual measurable numbers and provable. So I think especially working with big players, this is something that is very important. And what Bea is mentioning is something that is really, really important to know, that a lot of certificates are really, really expensive and they have to be renewed constantly, like often annually. So there is a constant price tag to this. And of course, they have to be ensured that they are implemented constantly, which means you also need to pay human resources to just ensure the process of the certification processes on site in your own facilities. And this is something that not everyone can afford, or is not everyone able to do. And of course, in this situation, we as customers or like as consumers, or maybe as customer brands from smaller facilities, we have to understand that asking something like this is also maybe a bit beyond doable. And how can we support them in not having a certificate, but still being able to build up a trustworthy relationship without, you know, requiring certificates and putting them on this kind of pressure of having to pay for it. Yeah. There are, I think, what is something that a lot of people are not happy about in the fashion industry, that we have so many different types of certificates that it became kind of difficult to oversee which certificate is actually for what. And only a very few make it actually on the hang tag on the final garment for consumers to see. And the consumers are, of course, the ones who are requesting transparency and would like to know more information, detailed information on the product that they are buying. So, for example, Global Organic Textile Standard, GOTS, is a standard that is covering both environmental and social sustainability along the whole supply chain. So every single process, including the transportation, and which has to be also on the final tag of a garment. So this would be, for example, a certificate that makes it easy for a consumer to understand, okay, there have been measures taken along the whole supply chain for every stakeholder, every process. So I can kind of trust this product to be safe and healthy and beneficial for people and planet. While others really just look at one single stage of the supply chain. So it could be that your garment says organic cotton, but you wouldn't know actually how it was dyed. Maybe there were toxic chemicals involved, or the workers were not paid fairly. So is that really a truly sustainable garment then? So how much sense makes this certificate in terms of transparency for consumers? Yeah, so I think we need to consider always which kind of certificate is really needed, which is really supporting the actions that we want to achieve, and if this is in a healthy relation to the costs that come with it.
Thank you, Marina. I think another interesting question is also about when it comes to certification, is that, you know, who should be certified? Like, should it be the producer who has all the certificates and therefore assures that production is sustainable, or can the producer also request a certain behavior from the client maybe? Like, could the producer, for instance, say like, okay, the brands that I produce for need to follow a certain standard? Like, would that be an option? I'm wondering, Ziva, with your experience with Not a Stitch Up, has it ever happened that from a production perspective, you received a request from a client and you declined, or you were hesitant to take it because you thought, okay, I think that the values of this client are not in line with the values of our production facility?
Yeah, that does actually happen quite a lot. We're really lucky in the way that, like, yeah, the nature of the business, the clients that do kind of come to us, or the brands that do come to us, are ones that really align with our values, and beautiful partnerships are often formed. But yeah, there's definitely people, we don't negotiate on price. We don't nudge on our pricing. We've calculated exactly what our overheads are, what our makers need, and how many pieces we can make per month. And we are very calculated in that regard. So there is no risk in not being able to, you know, meet those marks. So when it does come to all that kind of stuff, we just can't budge. So there is definitely people that try to push and push and push, which is the nature of the fashion industry. It always happens, that we have to just kind of decline and let go. There's been some other clients that we've had that, yeah, we've started working together, but then can just see down the track that it's not a healthy relationship, and we don't actually have our values aligned when it comes to like the nitty gritty stuff that we've had to say goodbye to. And yeah, there's definitely, I think it's about finding that partnership always that to go back to that certification question as well, I think the whole general gist of this thing is like, I think it needs to be like moving into the future, less of like us and we, no, us and them. It is that partnership, and it is working in unison. And it's once we break down that wall and they like producers and brands like work together, that's when the magic will happen, and that's when things can actually change.
Yeah, definitely. That's very interesting. And I think sometimes, the education should go two ways. So the consumer can ask those questions, and it's very good to ask those questions, but also the producer can actually ask those questions. And sometimes maybe we should all be more aware that the producer does also have the power and does have the right to not always accept every request that they get, because they can also set boundaries and say like, no, this is what it costs, and it is that way, rather than being forced. It is, of course, in the current system very difficult sometimes for producers to do that and set that boundary, because there's always a financial aspect. Because in the end, it is business, and they are needing like the income also from their clients to, keep going. But I think it's true. It's looking for that balance. And what you're saying about partnerships, I think that's really what it is about being partnering. And that, I think that's also very well described by Bea with her example, how she's working together with the artisan to get certification, rather than just asking and requiring like, I only want to work with people who do have certificates, but rather work together to come to that point. So
I also recognize that we are actually in like a really unique position, that we do have that waiting list, and we can select people. It is like, our factory is very different from bigger ones. So in saying that, like, I do recognize that other factories, they are really challenged in like, they can't be as picky with who they take on, and they are desperate just to make, any income that they can get. So I think that we are very, very lucky in that regard. And in those cases, those factories don't have as much power, and that is where the consumer demand really has to play a big part, and the brands have to as well. It's like all three of those sort of categories have to be working on like creating a more sustainable future. It can't just be the producers, because I am in quite a unique position to kind of stitch up, just to clarify.
Yeah, thank you for that. I see we have another question coming in. It's from Victoria Kolesnikova. And she is saying, from a consumer point of view, big fashion brands would produce clothes here in Indonesia and export it and label it, for example, with made in US. But that same brand, like say Banana Republic, would sell it for much higher prices to local Indonesian consumers. Also about the added carbon footprint. Okay, thank you for your question, Victoria. Does anybody wants to add about that? So I think what she is saying is that sometimes clothes are made in Indonesia and then exported to other countries, for example, USA or Europe, and then get the label of the brand. And then people in Indonesia are importing those same clothes again and buying it as being like a foreign label. So I think the main question is here, is it about importing clothes from other countries or buying more locally? I think that's the question here. Sophie, do you want to?
All right, I think if you demand fashion brands to pay fair wages at the bottom, I mean, a lot of fashion brands are not doing that, right? And I like that question that this lady is asking, because I think she kind of realized that not only do fashion brands not pay fair wages to the people here in Indonesia, to Vietnam and Bangladesh, but they also try to make profit a second time by exporting and importing it back in the same country and asking people to pay, to pay more. I mean, it's like, yeah, I mean, is this ethical? I think that's the question. Is this ethical to, yeah, not pay fair wages to people who are making the clothes in Bangladesh, but at the same time exporting and importing back in Bangladesh, like, okay, this is a big brand, and of course the people in Bangladesh want to buy it, but probably also they don't realize the cost of these clothes, right? That it's actually at the cost of their own people. I mean, I actually would like to just say, is this ethical? Is this, yeah, is this ethical? A company, yeah, yeah.
Marina, do you want to reply to that?
Yeah, I think actually that's a very interesting question. Of course, Indonesia is one of the largest producing countries in the world for textiles. So it's among the 10 biggest countries to produce garments. So there's a good chance that products that we would buy from big players have actually been produced here. And I think the question, there could be two things that can happen. So either this brand that you're talking about has no logistics center or distribution center in Indonesia itself, and it's producing here. So actually all goes into the US-based logistics center and then is distributed in all the different countries. That could be one option, but as you said, then the label says made in US. And this is coming back to our previous question on made in, what is better or not. Like made in labeling means only where the last process step has been conducted. And that could be just sewing in the label into a garment. And then they can already claim it as made in US. So if this is the value proposition of this company to say we are a US brand and this is made in US, then in this case, they would have to sell it back home first to the home country, stitch in the label and then distribute it to their markets globally. And but this is then also, it's not also an ethical attitude question to the brand, but also to the consumers who are buying into this kind of thing, because especially in Asian markets, it is very popular to buy products that are made in a certain area. And then that means also we need to question, of course, is that actually what has happened, or is something like what you are picturing here has happened, which is totally unethical and makes no sense at all, especially looking into carbon emissions and transportation and re-logistics and everything, which would be absolutely weird to do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And we do have another question also for Marina, and it's saying, what's your opinion about B Corp certification?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was, what is your opinion about B Corp certification?
Yeah, interesting. I think B Corp is very difficult to achieve. So it has a very high standard on requirements. And I think someone that has a brand or a company that has achieved B Corp is someone whom we can really truly trust, that they do actually put a lot of efforts into making a change. So I would say this is quite a high standard to achieve, yes.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I think we're slowly going to the end of the conversation. Maybe to end with, maybe I will ask all of you. So, firstly, what do you think about having Corona currently, and then connected to all the issues that we've discussed before? Do you think that this current situation that we're all in with the whole world at the moment, do you think that that will make a change to how we move forward in the fashion industry as a whole? And then secondly, do you have an advice for buyers, for consumers, on what, how they, if they want to do the right thing, how should they do it? Like what questions to ask, what to buy, what not to buy? Should they even buy at all at the moment? Maybe try to yeah, answer those questions, that will be great. Maybe start with Siva.
Yeah, I think with the global crisis at the moment, I've been neither surprised at all with how the fashion industry's kind of acted, but I have been hopeful that it is going to change things. And I think now more than ever, there's a lot of attention going towards workers' rights, I guess in everyone's own countries, but also looking at how other countries are going to deal with this. I think, yeah, for the first time in our sort of generation, it's like the whole world is going through the same crisis. And I think that's just going to be a positive effect in the end. I hate to say positive, but it'll help everyone be able to resonate and just to realize that, like, yeah, it is humans at the end of the line that are making these, and like what are they going to do? Like how does that look? They're, you know, as more information comes out about this, which I hope it does, with the Pay Up campaign and stuff like that, you can see all the detrimental effects that this is happening and how, like, it's absolute outrage. And I think it's a real human rights issue. And I think I'd be really surprised if some brands aren't sued from this, from how they've acted with this whole thing. So hopefully it will move in a more positive direction. And in terms of like conscious spending, I think like everyone will be trying to shop more locally, and support that. So yeah, I'm really hopeful. I'm trying to be positive as well. So yeah, hopefully it goes forward like that.
Thank you. Marina, how about you?
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult question to answer, actually. If you look at the textile industry, it's a huge employer. It's employing millions of people all around the world. And what we right now see is a total crisis if you look into human labor. So actually, it's kind of a disaster. Like, I think, like, from a sustainability perspective, it's exactly what we have been asking for. We have been asking for a restart of our industry and a systemic change, and to set up our industry in a new and more healthy way. But what is happening right now is that actually it's a totally disrupted and partly even collapsed. So it gives us the opportunity to actually start from scratch, but the price that we are paying is too high. And what we have been asking for was that this comes organically. Like, we wanted an organic transition that is controlled and systemized, so that people can slowly shift, for example, from our industry in labor into other industry. But what is happening now is this collapse is giving us this opportunity on one hand, but on the other, the price that is paid by humans is just too high. And I think what we have to find now is a really good solution to help everyone involved to come out of this in a good and healthy way. So yeah, asking if people should buy, I usually wouldn't say that, but I think right now it's the time to buy, unfortunately. So if people want to buy, they really should consider whom they should want to support right now with purchases. I always say only buy what you need and put your money where your mouth is, like where your values are. So really just support brands that are doing good. I think that's still how we should practice, but really, if you want to purchase, you can still purchase, and be aware that this probably will help and support someone right now massively. And don't judge right now, because this is an absolute crisis, and we have to also find out solution for those who are involved in mass production and fast fashion that are affected the most right now.
Thank you, Marina. And Bea, what would you say about this? I think your microphone is still on mute.
Oh yeah, sorry. No, can you hear me now? Yes. I say that I totally agree with what Marina and Siva have been saying, and I don't want to repeat already what has already been said. I think that indeed, I mean, thing is that these major crises and these many things are collapsing, and it's really showing, and it's giving visibility to things of globalization that were not visible before. I think like in any emergency, like in the work that I do, for instance, in international development, you need to cope and having coping mechanisms for the emergency, because especially those who are more vulnerable because of their health, because of their financial conditions or economic conditions, those are the ones who are going to suffer the most. So you need to come up with mechanisms that will help to cope and address that vulnerability, because those are really suffering from that current crisis situation. Having said that, I think that the crisis is also an opportunity, and a very needed opportunity. Me personally, and I think personally and collectively, if we come out of this and we try to go back to where we were, personally, I think it will be a major failure and a missed opportunity. And the big question to ask is like, what will be the next normal? Do we want to go where we were before, knowing that it was not a good place? It wasn't a good place. And I mean, it's like the evidence is out there, you know, it's like, it's shouting at us, you know? The big question is like, what can we do to make things different, you know? At an individual point of view, or a collective point of view also. For me, that's the big question today. And in a way, that whole COVID outbreak crisis is giving us that opportunity to reassess, like individually and collectively. For consumers, and I think my advice, and I don't know who said that, but I think it was Vivian Westwood, we need to buy less and buy better. We need to consume the way, I remember when I was a child, or my grandparents, the way they consume, you know, when they were like going to buy something. I mean, it's like it took time, you know, sometimes to make that garment, you know, and there was all that connection and relationship to that. We need to buy things that will last decades or even generations. I mean, it's like, buying less, buying yes, but buying less, buying better, and being better informed of what is behind, not being blind, because now we have the tools to go beyond, you know, like to know exactly what is behind. So I think that would be like my advice for consumers, and then buy where they think that trust exists, you know, like with brands that they can build that connection with. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. It's been really very inspiring to listen to all your stories. I thought that 2 hours would be a long time, but actually it wasn't. So yeah, very happy that we had this opportunity to share, and wishing you all the best for all your business in the future. Stay healthy. And of course, also to Sophie, I wish you all the best for the launch of Garb Slow Fashion in Bali. Thank you again for organizing this day. I'm very much looking forward for the other events that are still coming this day. I think you have a very exciting program coming up. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I'll give the microphone back to Sophie right now.
I want to thank you all for this really great conversation. I think it's beautiful actually to have 2 hours allocated to give you space to talk about these issues, and to actually also really go in quite depth, and also for answering the viewers' questions. I think they were really very engaged. So I just want to say that Fashion Revolution Bali is a pay-as-you-want event to all our viewers. And if you like this conversation, please support us through the link in the video description. All the proceeds going through the link will be equally distributed to the Fashion Revolution globally. And the other 50% will go to Indonesian charity. It's called Kopernik, and it will go to specific projects supporting the COVID emergency response here in Indonesia. I think those are two, so it's kind of 50-50. It's to address the issues here in fashion, but also still something current. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a really great day, and good luck on your journey. I think it's, I really, truly from my heart, I really want to say that to stay on this path of doing things ethical in this world where many things are driven by money must be very hard. And I really applaud you all for this, doing your part, and all the best, and stay true to yourself, I guess, right? So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.